Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're happy to have you with us today for our Fighting Chance, a summit on basic needs and child success. My name is Melissa Atkins Wardy. I am the director of the Texas Family Leadership Council at Children at Risk. And we're going to go through some housekeeping for our gathering today, and then we're going to get into the goodness and the good stuff. Please use our chat or the Q&A to ask questions. We will try to direct those to our speakers when our panels are over. And then for technical assistance, also just raise your hand function or put something in the chat. Also today we have Spanish interpretation. We're very excited to be able to offer this as we move a step closer towards language justice. So to enable the interpretation, you'll see a globe down at the right. You click on that and then select Spanish as your language, and you'll be able to hear everything in Spanish. So thank you to our interpreters for being here today. For audio quality, if you're in the interpretation Spanish side, for audio quality, it's recommended that you mute the original audio. Otherwise, you'll be hearing us in English and then trying to listen to Spanish, and that gets a little bonkers. So select Spanish, mute the original audio, and you will be all set. So before we jump in, we wouldn't be here today without our sponsors and their investment in the work we do and moving the needle for children in Texas. So an enormous thank you to Mattress Firm, who is our presenting sponsor today. They have made all of this possible. We offer our deepest gratitude and thanks to them and their partnership in this work. And also very large thank yous to Amerigroup and Amazon, who have invested in the entire learning series that Children at Risk offers throughout the year. We are just overjoyed that you are recognizing the work and the importance of supporting Texas children. So with that, I'm going to kick it off and let's get started. I would like to introduce you to Kindel Nuño. She is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel at Mattress Firm, and we would like to invite her to kick off today's gathering. Kindel, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa, and good morning to everyone. We are certainly excited to be here. At Mattress Firm, we believe everyone deserves a good night's sleep. We've been saying that for years. And ultimately, we know that the right mattress is the foundation for quality rest. But many other factors creating our overall sleep environment can also affect how well we and our children sleep. We know that quality sleep is instrumental to health and well-being, but that conversation tends to be focused on adults. Consistent, high-quality sleep is also critical for a child's long-term health and development. Sleep prepares the child for challenges that lie ahead and helps them retain the lessons of the day. So like food and shelter and clothing, sleep is a basic need that every child requires and deserves to have met. We know that every parent wants to be able to provide these basic needs and foster an environment where their children feel secure and safe. It's for these reasons that Mattress Firm is proud to partner with the Children at Risk team on this project. Children at Risk is known and therefore a national partner for their focus on fulfilling the holistic needs of children and examining the issues affecting child well-being. Together, we wanted to understand how to improve the quality of sleep and in turn, the quality of life for Texas children. The data that we're going to present today confirms much of what we have already suspected. Our children do not have equitable access to sleep. Socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, or even the street they may live on continue to have undue influence over the quality and quantity of sleep that children get each night. Children, like adults, are also affected by stress and feelings of insecurity, which can further impact their ability to sleep soundly. Through this partnership, we hope to elevate the conversation around sleep and the importance of quality sleep for children, from those infant stages to the big kid bed and on into adulthood and growing through life. Sleep is continuing to be an important factor. By highlighting sleep insecurities for children and the impact that the lack of quality sleep can have on health and well-being, We can now, as a community and as a state, shift our focus to improving sleep for Texas children so that they can dream big and grow up to be healthy and successful adults. Again, we appreciate this partnership and this opportunity to be here today. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa.
Thank you, Kendall. We so appreciate this partnership and your remarks, and we certainly want our Texas kids dreaming big, but they need the good quality sleep to do that. And so that is our perfect segue into our next panel, where we're going to talk about the data and the science behind all of this. So I'd like to introduce our very own fearless leader, Dr. Bob Sanborn. He's going to lead the panel, and joining him is Sharmily Roy. She's the director for the Center for Social Measurement and Evaluation at Children at Risk, and our two fabulous program directors, Jessica Bundage and Savine Villatoro. Dr. Bob, take it away.
Very good. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys. These are like the big heads at Children at Risk, right? The research team. So we're excited to have them here. You know, as we start this, I think, we did a series of press conferences around the state focusing on this, and we're going to try to look here in the next 20 minutes and open it up to questions at sort of that intersection of sleep and basic needs. But a lot of this is sort of part of momisms, right? Mom used to say, make sure, the breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Mom used to say, if you don't get good sleep, you're not going to do well. And I think there are a lot of those things that sort of are a part of basic needs that, mom was wrong sometimes. Sharmily, I don't know about your mom, but my mom was often wrong, and she continues to be wrong in adulthood. But a lot of those basic things are completely true. And when we did this study, Sharmily, and you were the primary author, give us a little bit of an idea. Were there surprises for you? And I know we got a lot of input from the literature, from people around the state, but what were the big surprises for you as we did the study?
Before I go to that answer to that question, I do want to say a couple of thank yous to both, Mattress Firm for us to be able to do this study, but also there are a lot of folks here from TSFLC and who were actually hosts for our data tour. So we did, a series of data tours to sort of confirm some of the things we got from the literature review, to see with the child serving organizations if that seemed to be right, and what they thought as experts in actually, having direct services for children. So I wanted to,
and you're right, we can never thank Mattress Firm enough. So we thank them. But what were the big surprises for you?
So the big surprises, I would say, just understanding the sleep, the three things, the importance of sleep throughout the life cycle. And then how child-friendly means, what it means in terms of our schools and other areas that affect children, sort of needing to be a little bit more aligned to the requirement of sleep, because it is so important to developmental needs. And then also how much attention, we're not paying to sleep, but how much sleep does affect other things in prevention of costly diseases and health conditions later on in life. So I would say those are three main things that I just didn't understand the importance of sleep, to be honest. Mother didn't listen to her that one.
Sharmily, one of the things that came out of this, we have these sleep insecurity maps, right, from all over the state, these they're by zip code, right, where we see these areas where there's severe sleep insecurity. Talk though about the overlap, right? Because we're here talking about basic needs, and there seemed to be a significant amount of overlap with poverty, with food insecurity. Do all of these go naturally hand in hand, or are there some differences?
Well, there were, again, some things that we found from literature we knew that we had to include. We knew that there were things that are such as poverty leading to parents, having 2 to 3 jobs that don't end up being able to provide enough time, bonding time with children. So there were things like that, or poverty leading to overcrowding in the household. So there were things that were sort of sequela or, effects of poverty that came out of it. So yeah, we definitely wanted to use certain community level data. So we looked at zip code level data, using census data allowed us to look at that level. And then we looked at proportions of certain factors. We took 11 factors and proportions of those things in the community. So the report will have more information. So I don't want to go into all of them, but we looked at things like number of households in poverty in that zip code. We looked at how much overcrowding there was in households, proportion of that in that community, in a zip code. We looked at things like children who are working. So this came out of data tour. Again, there were factors that came out of data tour that we didn't think about before, but once we talked to folks and it kept resonating throughout the 5 or 6 communities, we went to El Paso, Austin, Houston, Dallas, so all of the Rio Grande Valley. So all of the places we went to, if the same things kept resonating, we have to add this to our sleep index measure. So children who are working, so youth who are working, it affects their sleep. And then we looked at disability in the community. Basically, children who have disabilities may have different types of needs, and that affects their sleep, as well as just some other factors that we weren't thinking about. But if it was, we couldn't get the child level, but we knew that there was some correlation. So we looked at mental health, we looked at obesity rates. So those are some things that went into this index that, and each of those, again, proportions of that in a zip code led us to realize, okay, all of these factors together, when they start to layer and be concentrated in the same zip code, they're creating risk. So we have our population that we have, we say are this many kids are at risk. We're saying these many kids could be at risk of sleep insecurity.
Yeah.
Obviously, that doesn't mean in every household that's happening. We couldn't obviously interview every child in every household, but we were able to just say at the population level, here are some factors and here are the children. So this is a very definitely aggregates that we're discussing and not individual family.
Yeah. Jessica Bundage, I know that you're a big part of this. And I wanted to ask you, one of the things we found a lot of sleep insecurity, but this idea of sleep inequity was something, right? It's almost a new lens for us to look at this. And to you, what were some of the significant parts of that whole idea of sleep inequity? Because it seems so interesting.
Yeah, so when we're talking about sleep inequity and just going off what Sharmily saying, there's some neighborhoods where like they have a high concentration of those factors that contribute to a sleep insecure household, and then other neighborhoods where like they don't experience that at all. And then you want to delve deeper into why is that, what is making that possible. So as for instance, household sizes that are larger, lower economic status, and then also the location of neighborhoods. And then another factor too that contributes to sleep insecurity is mobility of children. So like, let's say if you don't have a necessarily stable housing situation, you're sleeping somewhere different every night, that obviously contributes to sleep insecurity, and looking into that as well, and how that contributes to the sleep inequity that we see in certain communities versus others.
Yeah. And how about the intersection of poverty and sleep inequity? What were you seeing there, Jessica?
So especially when we're looking at inequity, especially from a racial disparity standpoint, this is where historical practices of neighborhood segregation and racial and redlining play, where you have neighborhoods that are in quote unquote urban areas that are more likely to be located near major highways and have more traffic and have more noise pollution, such as like sirens and whatnot. And so obviously that's going to disrupt your sleep patterns, and more light pollution where you're just seeing more effects that disrupt your sleep patterns. And that goes into quote unquote Black and brown communities living in areas that are deemed less ideal versus a white community that's in a quieter area where there's less disruptions to sleep patterns. And that goes into like the racial inequities that we see in sleep. And that's another thing that we wanted to highlight in this study as well.
Jessica, from your perspective, were we seeing, we've done the child care deserts that children have done. 10 years ago, we launched the whole idea of food deserts in our state. And I think when we did those two things, no one had ever heard of those things before here in Texas. And so do you feel like this whole idea of sleep deserts is something that it almost seems more universal appealing, right? Is this something that you think we'll be able to look at legislatively as we move into the future?
Yeah, that's definitely the hope that we're looking for when we went into the study, is what more can be done. Because there are some areas that just go overlooked when we're talking about sleep and sleep insecurity. And this is where we talk about policies that could affect that and change that, such as school start times and whatnot, and better access to childcare. And so there are some areas that can benefit from this. And these are the areas that need these policies the most. And that's what we're looking for when we're highlighting this in our studies.
Yeah. Savine Villatoro, how are you doing, Savine? Nice to have you here on the panel. Tell me a little bit about, I know that you were part of the data tour, but talk about the data tour and getting other people's ideas around sleep insecurity. I sometimes think, and I wonder what your take on this is, that do we take sleep for granted? Is this something that we've sort of taken for granted over time, the idea that we're getting sleep and it must be good?
Yes, I think it's definitely something we take for granted. I think another thing we also take for granted is how sleep insecurity can look different depending where you grow up. So nowadays, I feel like when you hear of lack of sleep, one of the first things that people think is the main culprit is technology. And while it is one of the causes, many times is not one of the main ones. I feel that the data tour highlighted the importance of community-based research. The conversation we had regionally allowed us to think of causes that we wouldn't precisely think at first glance. So for example, the school start times. People have pointed out that kids that usually live in border regions had to wake up even earlier to cross the border to go to school, or high schoolers that were having a second job after school, or many like cultural or house dynamics where many times in Hispanic culture, the eldest will have even more responsibilities when they get home if their parents were kind of like a late shift or third shift. So the concept that it's not a surprise that sleep and insecurity is higher within low-income communities or minority communities, but I feel it's important to involve the community, not only on the research side, but as we go on and implement, so we can come up with effective and inclusive solutions. So we can, highlight the awareness, the importance of what we need of sleep within our household. So it was exciting to kind of see the different views, the different living, and how the different dynamics of the region. So I think it made for a cohesive understanding.
I want to come back to you and talk a little bit about parents, but you bring up time, and I want to ask Sharmily this question. Time sort of played, and it may be one of the easier fixes, right? Solving poverty is a little bit more difficult. Other countries have done it, but we still have yet to do it. And I'm wondering if this idea of time is something, whether it's the time that we start school, or the elimination of the change, whether it's daylight savings or daylight standard. How much impact, Sharmily, would that have if we sort of paid more attention to time in our children and sleep?
Well, I mean, overall findings in general, and this comes up in the inequities and disparities kind of conversation as well, is that even 30 minutes of and 1 hour of sleep, not getting the adequate amount of sleep affects children's development. So there's differences in terms of when you're not getting the adequate amount over time, there's sequelae and repercussions of that. But in terms of like daylight savings, that whole practice that we do, so the disruption twice a year definitely affects children's sleep. So for days and even weeks, so it's not just like that day, the next day, but it's like, it continues on until you catch up or whatnot. And then if you have schoolwork and other things, you may never catch up. So we looked at a study that truly examined the way adolescents sleep and the way sleep-wake cycles work. And they actually suggested using a standard time, because the way daylight clock works, the biological wake time that works best for adolescents. So for adolescents, there is a recommended later school start time of 8:30 a.m. just because of the way their physiological body works. And again, this also is because, like I was saying, like alignment of child-friendly practices is also aligning everything else that affects children. So kids who are in clubs and other activities doing after school work, obviously teens are going to sleep longer or go to sleep later, and technology obviously. But given just their normal biological sleep-wake cycle, they suggest using the standard time, because the way daylight savings clock works and biological wake time works with the sun, the standard clock is a little bit more forgiving. Otherwise, the latest start time kind of negates that daylight savings clock. So I know it's a little bit of like, which do you want? So definitely getting rid of the twice a year change is good for everybody. But if we're going to pick a time Some studies will say, if that have looked at this specifically, is that, you know, going with a standard time is a little bit better.
And really, in the end, it's more about the time change than anything, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, thinking about like children's performance and tests and just being able to go to school, and then even like a little bit older kids, teens who are driving, you know, I don't want a sleep deprived teenager driving in the streets.
Yeah.
And so on.
But I think, you know, sometimes we overcomplicate it. And if we just went to the state legislature and said, let's just not have any changes. You guys pick what you want, but if we don't have any changes, it's going to be better for us. But those are the easy fixes, Sharmily. And I wonder, to me, it was overwhelming in this study that the big fixes, the big policy changes have to do with the elimination of poverty. And if really, in a sense, the more that we fight for basic needs to be met for our children and our families, the more secure sleep will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we just kind of, and going back to parents, you know, parents are often not able to support their children's needs due to various hurdles, again, like you were saying, outside of their control, that are working against them sometimes. You know, for instance, parents who have shift work can't rely on quality childcare after hours. You know, they cannot think that they're going to get, we already have childcare deserts, and non-traditional hours is like, you know, don't even think about it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then also, although our recommendations for parents have the best of intentions, many parents, as you know, think about this, is like, you know, can't really have the time with their children to really go through good bedtime routines, you know, like go through good hygiene practices that will help their kids have quality sleep. So to provide the same quality of bonding time as their counterparts who may not be in poverty or may have more time to spend their kids, as parents who are working 2 or 3 jobs, we really need to look at those policies like child tax credit.
Yeah, the child, to me, that was the sort of the glowing recommendation, right? That child tax, you know, which is just a great idea for eliminating child poverty. As we talk about parents, I'm going to get back to Savine, because I know I told Savine I was going to ask her about this. But when we think about parents and sleep, it seems to me, in society, we understand that certainly for little kids, parents aren't getting the sleep that they need. And we always talk about this, right? This idea that you have a newborn, every newborn, you know, first time newborn parents, I always say, you know, the first 6 weeks is going to be, you know, hell for you, right? It's very tough for parents early on. But talk about sleep and the impact on parents over the lifespan of childhood, Savine, because it seems to me that that's tremendous.
You know, when looking at child sleep insecurity, I think it's important to look at the whole household, and that involves bringing in the parents. So how the sleep that parents are getting can sometimes affect how they bond with their kids and how the household is run. So I think it's very important to have a more cohesive study to look at parents, the support systems they have for their financial stability, being able to provide resources to the parents so that they, and in return, can provide a more healthy environment for their kids. I think it's very important. So it's definitely, as we do more research, something more to look into more.
Yeah, we had some specific recommendations for parents. And as I've talked to a couple of different people, and Sharmily, you've been part of these conversations, people are sort of love this idea that parents, there are steps for parents to be engaged in, right? We're not leaving it up to policymakers. Sometimes with poverty, you know, it's sort of out of your control in many ways, but some of these sleep habits for parents to institute around their kids are important. Can you talk a little bit about that, Sharmily, in terms of the recommendations for parents and how parents can be a big part of their child's success in regards to sleep insecurity? You're on mute, Sharmily. I live to say that, I must say.
Yeah, so I mean, I would just say, you know, going back to what you were, you know, as some of the findings that we had and some of the ways we kind of came to some conclusions. So good sleep hygiene, basically we talked about, you know, reading to children. We talked about having certain bedtime routines.
And that set bedtime, that's such an important part of this, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So having the same bedtime every day, even disruptions during the weekends, really affects that you know, that.
Yeah.
sleep cycles and behavioral issues later on. We talked about reading a book or singing or praying together, whatever that practice is that kind of is both for language acquisition and also bonding. Having some kind of an exercise before during the daytime, doesn't have to be right before sleep, bedtime, but maybe in the afternoon, going for a walk as a family. We also discussed, and I guess I think we discussed as in because this came out of, again, what parents have talked about, and then also what you and I and just other, being able to talk to experts in who work with children can talk about. So, I mean, set a regular bedtime, read a book together, take a walk together. Eating dinner together is something we talked about as well, because it's one of those things that's a good bonding thing, but also, again, as we say, that everything that affects sleep is also like the whole child aspect of things. So eating together has many other aspects of bonding, eating, regulating what you eat, understanding, like paying attention to your food and all those other ways that it can also affect the nutrition part of it, that also affects sleep and obesity and other things that are going
what I liked about these recommendations is that for a lot of us, and certainly for a lot of people on this in this seminar, we're going to know these things, right? These are sort of, but it's always good to remind parents, right? Set a bedtime, read to the kids before going to bed, take a walk, keep the room cool, stay away from screen time. I just love, these are just very nice recommendations. And what's also great is that they're good for everyone, no matter what your income level or age level, it's good for every little Texan. I think that's one of the things I love. And I love the idea that Mattress Firm said, maybe we're going to have these signs in every store and give these to parents as they come by the, because it's always good to remind parents about some of these things. We're going to open it up to questions in the Q&A chat for our 150 participants that we have online right now. If they have specific questions about the research and about the intersection of basic needs and sleep, we'll be able to answer a few of those questions. But let me start with big takeaways. I mean, what was your biggest takeaway from this? And Jessica, I'll start with you. When you think about the overall study and the work that we've done sort of around basic needs and sleep, what's the big takeaway for you around this, Jessica?
For me, the biggest takeaway is when we're talking about all the basic needs is that we're not putting the blame on parents. And for some parents, it really isn't feasible for them to do some of these recommendations. So that's where it comes in at the policy level, at the state and local level, state and federal level as well, where like more needs to be done at those levels to give parents the supports that they need, such as access to childcare, and giving them the financial supports that so like they don't have to necessarily be working graveyard shifts, or that they can have a better housing stability situation for their kids. So that's the biggest takeaway for me, is that we're not blaming the parent and putting it on the onus on them. And some of it is they just need more supports at different levels of government. And that's what the support is also trying to strive for with these policy recommendations as well. Because it can't just always be on them, because some of the things that we're recommending for some of these parents, it's not feasible, and also acknowledging that as well. And then that's going into, okay, so what more can be done at the state and federal level?
It does come down to that a lot, doesn't it, Jessica, is that we do need our state, federal government to step in a lot. When we have, close to 30% of our kids living below the federal poverty level, but 60% of our kids that are in low income families, right, as defined by school. That's a lot of families in the state of Texas that need some help, right? So Savine, your big takeaway on all of this?
My big takeaway, I think, it's kind of the lack of awareness around sleep that there wasn't. Many times, like I grew up in a low income home, and I would kind of realize, we have 5 siblings, and at one time, all 5 of my siblings were sleeping in one bed. So this study was kind of like, oh, that's not normal. So for the longest, for me, it was just my normal and how I live life. So through that, like educational awareness, I reflect, I'm like, oh, there was issues, and what can be done to make policies or recommendations so that, other households that may not have most of the resources still have kind of tips and recommendations to create a healthy environment around sleep. So definitely educational awareness is one of the main things that I took away, and how we need to distribute this back into the community.
Yeah, we're starting to get questions in, so that's good. Thank you very much, Savine. Sharmily, your big takeaway, right? We'll get to the questions in a minute. What's your big takeaway?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was an opportunity to look at it from a social determinants, aspect, holistically look at the whole child. So I would just say, sleep is a public health issue. That was my biggest takeaway in terms of we need to look at child-friendly settings, schools, wherever they are, like after school, other activities, what they do. All of those things need to align to help the basic need of sleep as one of the developmental needs for children.
Yeah. As we start getting into it, well, we'll do a couple minutes of questions. Go ahead and put them in the Q&A. But the first one I think is a good one, right? I mean, one of the things that we understand about sleep insecurity is that kids with sleep insecurity are going to have significant potential for mental health problems. And I'll lay on that significant problems with obesity, significant problems in terms of risky behavior. Talk a little bit about this issue, Sharmily, the mental health issue, and sleep insecurity's impact on the mental health of our children.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that starts in utero, like developmentally, like, the pregnant mother getting enough sleep affects children's, it reduces the risk for high blood pressure, preeclampsia, those types of things. But in terms of the mental health part of it, at each age level, it's different. So for younger kids, not the mental health, not getting enough sleep has mood issues. Children are clingy. They have separation anxiety when they're toddlers and infants. When they're a little bit older, it manifests in behavioral issues, aggression, and even what actually this came out of data tour is that the ADHD and a lot of other school issues could be linked to lack of sleep for children. So something that is thought of or misdiagnosed or manifested in other ways is could be a matter of getting adequate quality and quantity of sleep. So, without disruption and enough hours. And then for a little bit older kids, it goes into, part of those mood, impulse control issues. It can result in anxiety, depression, even suicide ideation and risky behaviors, as you were saying, can come out of lack of sleep. So all of these things have been coming out of, a lot of robust studies that did good research that were able to link these to each other. The associations were pretty strong. So I feel like these are very strong links to mental health and other ways that, just get enough sleep, and then you won't have some of these major things that you think are a lot, the manifestations are really big issues, but just enough sleep seems like an easy thing.
Sharmily, as we talk about basic needs for children, what grade would you give? This is not a question that I told you I was going to ask you, so this here's just a surprise question. What grade would you give Texas in terms of meeting the basic needs of children, especially that 60% of kids that are growing up in low-income families? How are we doing in regards to basic needs? How are we doing in regards to sleep? What's the grade that you give them? Because I know as a researcher, you love to give out of the blue, right? I know that's something you love.
So I would say somewhere between a C and a D, because we can do better. We have the resources to do better. There's states who, I'm not saying we're richer than other states or poorer, but I mean, literally, we have a lot of.
We are richer than most other states.
Yeah, we have a lot of economic wealth to be able to serve children well if we just align them to serve children. Policies that are providing, adequate healthcare access and those types of things, basic needs, as you were saying, poverty. Do kids have access to food and food security issues? So all of those things are very easy if we become more child-centered and really care about the children in our state.
And how would you grade us in terms of sleep insecurity? And I'm going to ask Jessica and Savine to do some grading as well, just because I know they love doing that.
Yeah, so, no, I think my C was for everything going together.
Everything. Okay.
Yeah.
C,
to be honest,
C,
like I said,
between a C and a D, though, right? Between a C and a D, you're like almost a D plus or C minus. Yeah.
D plus or C minus. Yeah. Because we have the resources, we can do better. Needs improvement.
We could do a lot better. Jessica, how about you? What sort of basic needs first and then sleep?
For basic needs for Texas, I probably agree with Sharmily. I'd also put us at the C, where we could definitely be doing better than what we're doing. It's just the will at the state level is just not there, but we have the resources to be doing better to provide parents with the basic needs that they can have to support their children. And then at the sleep level, I would also give us a C as well, where it's just like more can be done. And it's just, where's the will? We just need to have that will to be doing more to support our parents and their children.
I did think it was interesting though, that when we look at the maps, right, when we count the number of kids in each of the zip codes that are sort of deep sleep insecurity, we're talking about 30 to 40,000 kids sort of in each metro area. And that seems like, when you look at poverty overall, it seems like a smaller number, though. Who wants to write off 38,000 kids, right? I mean, that's the sad part of this. That this is in many states that would be a significant portion. For us, it's it seems small, but that's a lot of kids that are sleep insecure in some of these areas, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Savine, I guess that wasn't really a question, right? I was just giving you.
I'm agreeing with you though.
Savine, I want to get one more question before we move to the next. So someone put a question in the box, but Savine, what grade are you giving Texas for basic needs and then for sleep?
I would have to agree. Sharmily and Jessica, I think a C is like the grade that says we're doing okay, but we can improve by a lot. So just establishing kind of the sleep habits early on, because I feel like if we look at sleep insecurity in university students, you're gonna find a whole other issues. And many times it can be led to not having a healthy sleep habit growing up, or not knowing how to handle stress. So I definitely, having kids have the basics need growing up and the sleep needed to grow up can kind of create healthier habits as we grow into adults and make wiser decisions.
Yeah, I think in Texas we tend to be nice and optimistic, and I think your nice and optimism is showing for all three of you, because it seems to me on basic needs Texas needs to get an F, right? And so we're just failing the majority of our children in the state of Texas from my perspective. And maybe based upon some of the numbers we saw, we could maybe give a C or a D on sleep insecurity. But that shouldn't be good enough in Texas. We're proud. We want to do really well, right? And so we should be doing significantly better. But with that, I want to thank Sharmily Roy, Jessica Bundage, Savine Villatoro. Thank you guys so very, very much for this wonderful piece of research. And for the great work that you guys have been doing. So thank you so much. And Melissa, what's the grade you're giving Texas on basic needs, do you think, Melissa?
Yeah, Dr. Bog, I think I'm gonna have to side with you and go more towards a D- or an F. I think that Texas could very easily be serving our children better. There's no need to have this many children living in poverty. We have the resources to do it. We just have to have the will.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew you'd fall on the activist side with me. I knew it.
That's right.
All right. Well, hey, as we finish up, I want to again thank Mattress Firm, Amazon, and Group. Mattress Firm was great with this study, and we hope to do much more nationally with this. And there's just so much potential. And I look forward to the rest of the day, Melissa, and we'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. So thank you to all my colleagues at Children at Risk. As you can see, it's always a source of pride to work here, and we do some good stuff. So thank you all, and I think that the most important takeaway from that panel was that mama knows best. I'm a Texas mom, I have 2 teens, and I feel like I spend a disproportionate amount of my time either begging them to go to sleep or around noon begging them to wake up. So I am very interested in hearing from our next speaker, who is a sleep expert, and I'm going to have my children watch this section. So I'm very happy to introduce our speaker as we do a deep dive into the sleep needs and the development, how it impacts children. So allow me to introduce the Medical Director of Children's Sleep Center at Texas Children's Hospital, Dr. Binal Kancherla. Dr. Kancherla, we'd love to hear your remarks.
Okay, hi, how are you? Thank you for having me here today. I just have a few slides, and then I wanted to share, and then we can talk a little bit about sleep. So basically, when children come to us at the Children's Sleep Center, they are being referred because there's a problem with their sleep. So when we look at sleep problems across the age spectrum, it can vary as children develop and get older. So we have certain sleep disorders that we see more commonly in the newborn and toddler stage, and then it varies as they get older and into school age and teenage years. The sleep problems that we tend to evaluate and treat change as well. So in younger children, a lot of the sleep issues are dealing with lack of sleep and waking up at night. In normally developing children, it's usually related to nightmares and difficulty settling. Some of it can be socially related. Parental education is very important at that age. And education around proper sleep at that age is also important. As kids tend to get older, there can be other issues. In the school age and teenagers, we tend to see, again, lack of sleep. In teenagers, it's more due to early school start times, especially in Texas. But we can start seeing other disorders develop, such as sleep apnea, which can be related to other behavioral problems as well. So the spectrum of sleep disorders is large, and it also varies throughout the age spectrum. So 25% of all children have a reported sleep problem. The most common issue is behavioral insomnia of childhood. And then when you get into some of these more rare issues, the incidence decreases. When we're thinking about parasomnias in general, nightmares have a high prevalence, and these tend to occur in the early school age kids under age 10. So around 6 to 10 is when nightmares truly peak. And then we get into the more rare things such as sleep-related breathing disorders or OSA, which we see a lot of, but in the general population only occurs in 2 to 3% of all children. Insufficient sleep is very high in teenage years, up to 33%. And then when we talk about hypersomnia disorders such as narcolepsy, it's again very rare. We tend to see a lot of it as a tertiary care center, but less than 1% of the population of children have a diagnosis of narcolepsy. Factors that are really specific to sleep disorders in children, so age and developmental capability. So certain comorbidities increase your risk for some of these disorders. Of course, any additional medical problems, parental education, parental buy-in to the sleep disorder is also very important. Cultural, familial, and societal influences also play an importance. I remember, I heard one of the other panelists saying how, she grew up in a house and they slept with 5 children in one bed. It's not uncommon for co-sleeping to occur in many Hispanic and Asian households. I myself grew up in an immigrant family, and we all slept in the same bed growing up, and I had 3 siblings as well. Household environment can also play a factor. And I'm going to skip over this. One thing to keep in mind, so the National Sleep Foundation, they have sleep duration recommendations. These are ranges. And so as we age, our sleep needs decrease. But what's eye-opening is even teenagers need an average of 9 hours of sleep a night. So, the common thought that after you hit age 13 that you only need 8 hours of sleep is not true. The important thing to take away from this slide is just to know that sleep needs vary per child, and we have to focus on, is the child having a daytime impairment? And that usually, if they are presenting to us with a daytime impairment and they're sleeping on average, a little bit on the lower side on what their sleep requirement is at their age. Maybe they just need a little more sleep. And what I tend to find in my practice is even increasing children's sleep time by 30 minutes a night in the long term can have a huge effect on their daytime functioning and cognitive development. So that's all I had to present, really. I see a huge spectrum of sleep disorders, but the importance of sleep education and what we focus on as far as sleep hygiene in our clinics can really have a huge impact on a child's life and development and daytime functioning as well. And so I'm open to really taking questions. Again, the topic is so broad, but I really want to focus on what questions people have in the group and what everyone feels like is really important right now.
Thank you, Dr. Kancherla. So I'm actually going to take the opportunity to ask the first question.
Yeah.
We have a lot going on in the world right now, right? Like even before the pandemic, we knew that 1 in 8 kids had anxiety, and that's outside of any social economic inequities, right? And now we have the pandemic. Now we have the war going on in Ukraine. We have immigration issues here in Texas. There's a lot kids are hearing, right? And many of them have cell phones, so they're getting it delivered right to their palms without maybe the media literacy skills to digest and interpret all of it. So given this big world that's being condensed down into some micro news for kids, how do we balance that? And how do we help them sort of balance a lot of this really heavy news with being able to close all that out and go to sleep at night?
Yes. So I agree with you. There's a lot that kids are taking in from externally at this point. And I myself have 3 children, all under the age of 13. So they see a lot of stuff and they hear a lot of things from their classmates. The best thing is, to talk to your children, to talk to them. What I recommend to a lot of my patients, and I see a lot of children with comorbid mood disorders as well that come to me with sleep problems, really talk to them, have almost like a debrief, and it doesn't have to be daily, but a weekly, like take the time to listen to what they're hearing and let them process those feelings. And instead of questioning it or trying to put your own thoughts into their head, it's just listening to them. And it's almost like letting them unload those thoughts on someone else. And usually it's a parent is a great way. It's a great outlet for them. So take the time to listen. A lot of my patients do journaling, but they journal with their parents. It's a time to get those thoughts out of your mind and onto paper. And it really helps to release them for when you're getting ready for bed and you're not persistently thinking about them or perseverating on those details. Screen time is very important. I know it's hard with school to limit screen time, but I tend to say, try to limit anything that's non-school related or educational related to an additional 2 hours a day. In younger kids, that's as low as 1 hour. So, you really need to have an idea of what your children are watching, what are they listening to, then also let them tell you in their own words what is going on or what they're hearing, and let them have those feelings, but also acknowledge those feelings and say, okay, well, we've talked about it, let's move on from that. And just unloading those feelings oftentimes lets these children sort of feel better about it. So I think it's mainly communication. Communication is very important. Communication with your kids at home. And then try to limit what they're watching outside of school in the house if possible.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer. I mean, even with my teens, I have to be careful what they, right? Because they have like a deeper, sort of bigger kid understanding of what some of this stuff is. So yeah, thank you for that answer.
With all the new ways with social media, I gave a talk about 2 months ago where I posted all the different social media apps on the screen. And I asked everyone, well, how many of these do you actually know what they are? And I could maybe out of 30 name like 5 of them that I actually use myself, but everything else I didn't know and I was not familiar with. So it's good to familiarize yourself with those things so you know what your children are using and how they're communicating with other children and people in the world.
Yes, that's a whole nother summit name into that. Yes. Okay. So listen, we have some really good questions coming in. And this one I really like. It's the person asks, I heard LeBron James sleeps 14 hours a day. Do you think that publicizing anecdotes like that from celebrities might make sleep quote unquote cool? And would it encourage teens to sleep more? And how effective do you think that might be?
I think it's variable. I actually personally feel as a physician that it's not that teens don't want to sleep more. I think that they are not allowed to. If you think about it, most high schools start at 7 a.m. in the state, right? The buses are coming around 5:45 in some neighborhoods, depending on the distance to the school. And so that means kids are getting up at 5 in the morning. And they have homework, they have activities, they have a life, right? And so, and then in some situations, they are helping to raise siblings or they are working. And so they can't go to bed at 7, 8 p.m. And there's not even a natural drive because of their circadian clock. They can't fall asleep that early. So our circadian clock shifts around age 13 or when you hit puberty about an hour. So they're not going to be able to physiologically fall asleep that early. So I think, I think it could have an effect, but at the same time, I think until we change some of our policies, it's going to be very difficult to get teenagers to fall asleep earlier. I just think we're not allowing them to, and it's not that they don't want to. And a lot of these teens are perceived as lazy, but really they have a lot of other things they have to do. And if you're starting school that early, who can blame them? I don't think I could get up at 4:35 in the morning every day to get somewhere that early on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, I absolutely see that with my kids. They, my daughter, I could hear her talking in her room and it was 11:30 at night. This was 2 nights ago. And I, knocked on the door and went in there. I'm like, what are you doing, babes? And she's like, oh, we're finishing our project. And she was on the phone with a friend and they were finishing their PowerPoint. It was 11:30 at night and they were wide awake. Like there were no problems going on there. And yeah, so I think, yes, to your point though, I think the adults in charge need to be a little more responsible with what we're assigning to the kids and the schedules we're asking them to keep. So I have another question. I wonder if you could review with us, what is good sleep hygiene? What does that encompass? I'm sorry, I have a dog in the background who's very anxious to hear this answer as well.
Oh, no problem. Okay, so basically when we counsel about general sleep hygiene, that is good. We tell families to keep a consistent schedule. So trying to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. For families on the weekends, I usually say don't vary your sleep time by more than 1 to 2 hours. So, a lot of kids come in and see me and they say, well, we just catch up on sleep on the weekends. And actually that's counterproductive in the long term. So don't vary your sleep schedule too much. About the hour before bedtime is when you try to limit electronics, computer use, screen time, television use. Everything should be sort of shut down. Light therapy is actually very beneficial. It sets your internal circadian rhythm. So using dim light therapy in the evening and bright light therapy in the morning. So when you first wake up, bright natural light, exposure to that for at least 15 minutes can actually increase your natural secretion of melatonin, and that can help you sleep better at night. And then using things like, and I know it seems like an old wives' tale, but actually taking a bath at night lowers your core body temperature, and that's one of the signals to your brain to go to sleep. So it helps you fall asleep faster. So I tell a lot of parents, shift bath time to the evening, because it can actually lower your body temperature and help them fall asleep faster. And then try to do relaxing activities near bedtime. So it shouldn't be a stressful experience getting ready for bed, because I think that sort of makes the kids very wound up and more anxious around bedtime.
Yeah, those are all great tips. So you mentioned something, and this made me think, I know there's a lot of products on the market for melatonin gummies for kids to help them fall asleep. And perhaps that's because our kids aren't getting enough outside time and that natural sunlight. And we only have a couple minutes, but can you give me some thoughts on, should we be giving our kids melatonin supplements to fall asleep? Is that detrimental? What are your thoughts on that?
So melatonin can be very helpful in some cases. I wouldn't recommend using melatonin without consulting with your pediatrician. It's a safe drug. I've used it in many children for many years without any problems. But again, it should be used properly, and the dosing should be reviewed with the doctor, and the timing of the medication is also very important. So I wouldn't recommend starting any supplements for sleep without first discussing with your pediatrician, because that might actually not even be an issue. And again, it's important to remember that the melatonin supplements are not regulated on the market. So our body produces a fraction of what's available in those supplements. And you really don't need it if you don't have an underlying issue with sleep.
Good, thank you for that. So I have two last questions, and they go hand in hand. So the first question asks, what patterns have you and your colleagues noticed in your patients when it comes to getting insufficient amount of sleep? And sort of the sister question to that is there a link between later bedtimes with mental health issues, maybe, and this might be for older kids, such as depression and suicidal ideation?
Yes, so for the first part of the question, the patterns that we see sort of vary across the age spectrum. So in younger children, a lot of the bedtime resistance is behavioral. And so they tend to not want to go to sleep. They want to be with their parents. They tend to have what I call FOMO. Like, they don't want to go to sleep. Everyone in the house is awake. And so the bedtime resistance leads to insufficient sleep. And then their daytime functioning is impaired, because the younger children need closer to 12 hours of sleep. And most of them, if they're not in bed by 7, 8 p.m., they're not getting those 12 hours. And then the daytime cognitive impairment sort of follows that. As they get older, we still continue to see insufficient sleep, but that's more related to external factors, such as early school start times, other activities in the household, familial factors. Like I said, most children can start having jobs when they're 15. So of course they work after school, they come home late, do their homework, go to bed late. So the patterns sort of are consistent, but vary across, the causes vary across the age spectrum. And yes, there is a definite risk to later bedtime and mood disorders, depression. So teenagers that report a lower sleep times have almost a 3-fold increase in mood disorders and depression. There's not a direct relationship with suicidal ideation because that hasn't been studied well, but the actual prevalence of mood disorders and depression is higher in children who have a lack of sleep. Now, again, it's a chicken and egg scenario. We don't know what came first. So, you know, we know that depression, mood disorders are related to sleep problems, but we don't know, you know, which one is really cause and effect in that relationship.
That's great information. Dr. Kancherla, thank you so much for being here today. We are out of time, and I think I could continue asking you questions all morning.
No,
but,
thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, group. Well, we are going to switch to our next panel as we hold all of the information that Dr. Kancherla shared with us. I'm really excited to hear from this panel. So we have Dr. Cimberli Darrough, who is the Senior Director of Early Head Start and Head Start with Baker Ripley, Melanie McGuire, who's the Chief Programs Officer with the San Antonio Food Bank, Zoe Middleton, who is a policy advisor for Commissioner Rodney Ellis and a self-proclaimed housing and climate justice advocate, and Dr. Candice Castillo, who is the Executive Officer for Student Support Services at Houston ISD. Ladies, I want to welcome you all on. And before we get carried away, because I think this is going to be a really dynamic panel, I'm saying this out loud to remind myself as well. We need to try to speak slowly so that our interpreters for our Spanish language guests have time to translate our remarks. So, but that's mostly for me because I'm being told I speak way too fast. Okay, so my first question is for Dr. Darrough. Good morning. Okay, so this is what I want to hear about. You have dedicated your life to advancing educational success for at-risk and economically disadvantaged children. Can you talk to us about how Baker Ripley's Head Start and Early Head Start programs are uniquely positioned to help young children meet their basic needs while setting them up for future academic success?
Good morning, and thank you, Melissa, for having me. Our Baker Ripley's Early Head Start program is charged with providing 3,000 low-income children and families with the tools they need to be successful when they enter kindergarten. We hope that by providing early interventions, the foundation is set for the child to have a lifetime of academic success. Our Early Head Start program serves children ages 0 to 3, and we say 0 because we also provide services to our pregnant mothers. The Head Start program serves children ages 3 to 5. One of the very unique aspects of our program are the services and the resources that we deliver directly to our children and families in our program at our center locations and at our school sites. So we have 7 content areas that include education, disabilities, behavior and mental health, nutrition, health and wellness, and family and community engagement. Each of these content areas are led by what we call a content area expert, and that means that they're credentialed in that particular area. We do have standalone centers, but we also have ISD collaboration sites. Our largest partnership is, of course, with the Houston Independent School District. We also partner with Fort Bend ISD at one early childhood location. And our newest partnership is with the Stafford Municipal School District, and we're really excited about their partnership. So when the children enter our Early Head Start program, they're screened through our Child Development Services Department to detect any possible learning disabilities or any social or emotional issues. We have a very structured system that is called our Program Services Request, and that allows any staff or any parent to refer children and families for any of the services that we have available in our program. Another very important aspect of Head Start is our parents are viewed as partners. This is one of the aspects of the Federal Early Head Start program that I particularly love. Our parents are very actively engaged in every aspect of our program. They volunteer, they're welcomed at our locations, they participate in services, and they're actively involved in the governing decisions that are related to our program. So when I talk about resources, I wanted to, touch, of course, on the sleep deprivation. And with our program, we provide resources that help establish those healthy sleep habits. We emphasize the importance of sleep with our parents through healthy sleep literacy. We provide information on recommended sleep hours by age group. And we also make sure that we emphasize the consequences of poor sleep and the importance of establishing a routine. I just noted that the doctor that previously spoke had a chart on the screen that talked about the importance of sleep habits by age group. So we provide a similar chart to all of our early Head Start children to help the parents make sure they establish a bedtime routine that promotes healthy bedtime habits.
That's great. Yeah. So I actually used a similar chart with my kids this summer. We were trying to teach them that, like, listen, folks, you actually need 10 hours of sleep, not the 6 you're getting. So let's shut down Xbox and close our eyes.
We feel that, if you're empowering the parents and you're providing resources and services to the family, then that's how you uniquely position the children for future success. You provide the parents resources and you empower them, and then they in turn can make sure that their children are set up for academic success.
I love that. Perfect. Okay, let me ask you a follow-up question.
Okay.
So Dr. Darrough, let's say you and I are in charge of all things. What changes would we implement, right? Because we're going to be. So what changes would we implement to better support family well-being and reduce the inequities that we've been talking about this morning?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see more local partnerships working together. More of the nonprofits, the entities that provide resources in the community to make parents in the community more aware of the services that are available. We sometimes often find that our parents, even local parents, are not aware of resources that are available right across the street from them. When they come into the locations and they ask for things, we're able to provide them a resource list. Sometimes I can see the reaction and they'll say, oh, if I had this resource, I could have changed something that went on 2 years ago. So I think that the model that we use with the early Head Start program at Baker Ripley, I would love to see that become something that is a regional or national standard, because I believe that could impact way more children and positively change their lives.
Yeah, I love that. And resource sharing is so important as we're talking with community leaders and advocates across the state this morning. So that's definitely, I think, a takeaway action item that we can all work on and improve. Thank you so much, Dr. Darrough.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to switch to Melanie McGuire. Good morning, Melanie. You're joining us from San Antonio.
Good morning.
Waving hi to you from El Paso. So you are the Chief Program Officer at the San Antonio Food Bank. And I'd love to hear about what you all do in San Antonio. So your organization ensures that local families and children have the resources that they need to meet their most basic needs. And this sounds like an obvious question, but it's something Texas isn't getting right yet. Why are meeting those basic needs so important?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, first of all, that you preface this with local families, right? Because as we know, behind a hungry child is also a food insecure family. And so those intervention strategies really have to include, as many of our panelists have said, both families and children. Here at the San Antonio Food Bank, 35% of those that we serve are food insecure children. And we kind of operate through 3 strategic pillars. Food for Today, which is what people generally know about food banks, is that emergency response system. That has obviously been stretched now with the pandemic, inflation, the impact of jobs. And so really families coming into lines for pantries or food assistance for the first time. That's really difficult, right? If you can imagine, not being able to meet those basic needs and really receiving a supplement to those needs. But we know that that's not going to be enough to at all move the needle on food insecurity, particularly with children here in Texas. We are disproportionately impacted in Texas with very alarming rates of food insecurity in children, which is really, sad thinking about, all of the resources that we're trying to put toward this effort and really not seeing that needle move in the direction we're hoping for. But then really our tomorrow strategies really center around stabilization. And so we need to get people out of the emergency food assistance lines, as we've seen so much during the pandemic, to really stabilization strategies. And for us, those include ensuring that families are accessing federal benefit programs such as SNAP, Medicaid, WIC, all of those necessary stabilization strategies, along with that emergency food, that's really going to help them to manage those their budgets. Similarly, we do intervention programs specifically for children. So, after school meals, summer meals, we do food pantries in school settings, grab and go options, things like that, so that we're getting more food into daycares, into school districts, national school lunch programs. And then our lifetime work, which we really think it's like, how are we going to get these families not needing our services in the first place? And really that centers around living wage. Oftentimes we hear that families, the reason that they're accessing food, the reason that they're not able to feed their children is they simply just don't have enough income and assets. And the cost of living, particularly now in Texas, and especially here in San Antonio, is so alarmingly high that they're just not going to be able to make those ends meet. And so really we focused quite a bit now on, jobs, how do we get living wage jobs? And oftentimes that means really helping families, whether it's navigating the new market that jobs are in terms of being so electronic. We do digital literacy programs. We do case management, as well as working with our local colleges and training programs to really ensure that families have access to those opportunities to hopefully be able to mitigate some of those strategies. And so all of that's critically important. Oftentimes people think of food banks and think of just emergency food, but I will say food banks across the country are doing so much more because we understand that this issue is complex and that we're not simply going to solve it with a canned good.
Yeah, I love that, Melanie. You've done such a good job of weaving together how it's really these families, it's like a spider web, right? It's not just like, here is a can of food for you. Like, that's not really solving anything, right? Like that's just lunch for today. So thank you for kind of weaving that together. So that goes into my follow-up question for you. What are some best practices that you would like to see implemented more frequently from other organizations who work to meet basic needs for family and community? Like for a lot of our agencies that are listening today, especially our Texas Family Leadership Council partners who might be health, mental health, out of school time providers, family service, community family services, even some of our early childcare education people. What should we be doing in our agencies to support the work you do and meeting basic needs?
Yeah, great question. I think, it's such a complex issue, so it really involves all of us working very closely together. I think everyone's kind of echoed that sentiment. And so oftentimes, we're talking with organizations and trying to help bridge that connection of, hey, why would I put food in a services for mental health? Or, for us, we were often asked, like, why would you offer digital literacy programs if you're a food bank, right? So I think there's a real opportunity to really find opportunities to connect services so that's really reducing barriers for families, right? It's so difficult if a family has to go to one location for one service and then turn around to go to another location for another, right? And those barriers oftentimes are the reasons that families aren't just leveraging these services, right? So it can be as simple as making sure that, as part of your screening process, you're asking families about SNAP or other federal benefit programs, or that you've developed a relationship with your food bank. Food banks across the country are doing amazing things. Our Texas food banks we're part of an association. And so we're having these conversations all the time. So if you're not familiar with your local food bank, and what they're doing, it's a great opportunity as an organization to make that ask, to say, are there ways that we can be partnering together? Is there a great referral system by which we can, have a much more coordinated referral process in place? But I think there's definitely so many ways, or whether it's on the policy front, programs like PEBT were amazing for families. We saw food lines go down when families had more access to those benefit programs. And I would say finally, we need everyone's support now more than ever. We know that SNAP benefits are going to be impacted probably likely in the summer. And that's going to mean that more people are going to have funds that they normally would expect to have every month now out, taken away from them. And with inflation the way it is, it's going to put more people into food lines. So if you haven't connected with your food bank, if you haven't found ways that you all can create some synergies, I would strongly encourage you to do so.
Yes, thank you, Melanie, for all of that. And I have been really impressed with the food banks that are my role with the Texas Family Leadership Council. I have the privilege of working with all of you, whether it's the El Pasoans Fighting Hunger here out and then the West Texas Food Bank in Odessa and the Permian Basin, and y'all in San Antonio and our Houston Food Bank. All of you are just, you really make an impact on your community. So thank you for the work you do and putting good meals into families' bellies. We appreciate everything. So next, I'm going to shift to Zoe. And this, I'm really interested in this. We had a great comment in the chat. I don't know if you all saw it, but when we were talking about the sleep equity and putting kids to bed, someone made the comment that with housing equity, a lot of poor low-income housing are near airports, highways, pollution. So all of these tips are great, but can they be implemented by families? So Zoe, this is what I want to ask you, especially as a policy advisor, you get to have a really big impact on this. And my first question for you is, as a housing and climate justice community advocate, and previously working with the Southeast Texas Director of Texas Housers, can you tell us about why housing stability is so critical to child development, and maybe share some key insights and best practices that you've learned through your work?
Yeah, so I think most of what I'll talk about is probably through the lens of eviction and the COVID-19 eviction crisis and the pre-existing eviction crisis. But, you know, eviction, the single greatest predictor of an eviction is the presence of a child in a household. And that's across the board nationally. And we know that Black and Latino families are twice as likely to rent their homes than own them. So you see this subset of children at extraordinary risk for housing instability. And we know that any kind of housing instability has a ripple effect across all these other health expressions, be it physical health, mental health, and community cohesion, right? Like you see, I used to be a teacher, you see the results of eviction in a classroom, and you see even, you know, families, you know, being separated and, you know, having an eviction treated as a form of housing neglect as a result of eviction. So I think in terms of the levers that we have to reduce eviction, certainly, you know, Melanie just talked about stagnant wages as a reason why people cannot afford quality food. It's also why they are partially why they are not able to afford their rent. In addition to the fact that we don't appropriately subsidize housing, right? So we don't have significant or sufficient enough depth of affordability, which means that people then end up paying more than they can afford because there just isn't the sufficiently affordable supply, which means that when you have a massive shock, like an illness, and you have to go out of work for a couple of days or quarantine for 10 days, that you are just that much closer to having an eviction. You know, statewide, we do not have really meaningful renter protections. We're one of like 3 states where if you're late on the 3rd, like you can be out. There's no chance legally, no protected chance to cure your rent. And, you know, it takes 7 to 20 days from the time you get that notice put on your door to when you can be completely out. And a lot of people leave before that. So I think, you know, on the state level, it is reforming how, like actually creating tenant rights at the state level where we have none. And then also nationally, you know, there's a lot of pressure for a homes guarantee, which is an entirely possible thing, and a tenant's bill of rights that would provide some uniformity across the board so you don't have a patchwork of protections from state to state that's different. So I think those are the 2 kind of levers and places to act. And then locally, right, we need a lot of money to do this locally, but, you know, having more money to further and more deeply subsidize housing so that people have options that are affordable to them in every neighborhood, and that affordable housing is not destined to be sited near hazards that are, you know, have negative effect on health or disruption to sleep and that kind of thing is really important. So it's a kind of a coordinated approach that we need, and we actually don't have that coordinated approach locally or nationally yet.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think very good points about at the policy making level, you know, tenants' rights and making sure that families aren't thrown out, especially as the moratorium on evictions ends with the pandemic, that we're going to see a lot more families hurting. So can you talk to us a little, maybe in a little more depth, about the neighborhood inequities and how housing and climate justice go hand in hand, and how those impact children's well-being and their access to basic needs?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I'm based in Houston. I know this is a statewide call, but we're no stranger to floods and disasters. And I think a lot of people primarily experience climate disasters in one of three ways. They lose access to transportation, which gets them to and from school and work and doctor's appointments and all these things that you need to the healthy, stable life. They lose their housing, or their housing habitability is severely decreased. So you might not have lost the unit that you live in, but there is rampant mold in your building, or the parking lot floods and that kind of thing. So, and then, or their school will be, we've seen schools damaged here as well. So there's a lot of various, impacts and ways that people experience climate that are really, really close, that they hit really close to home. And that instability, once you introduce it, especially for a child or for a family with children, that kind of chronic stress and disruption, and the higher cost, the disparate cost of climate disasters. People with less have more to lose, and their recovery is much more uneven and takes a lot longer. Is really important. So we've recently seen parts of the state not getting their fair share in mitigation funds, which are really flexible funds that can create infrastructure that protects people from flooding and wind damage and whatnot. And so that's stuff that we can, those are decades long investments that we can make to keep neighborhoods and families safe. And so, that's one way that kind of like this unsuspecting relationship between infrastructure and large scale infrastructure protections actually has, a ripple effect down to, the household level.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? Do you have like a statistic on how frequently families who, these vulnerable families who face eviction, especially we know our families of color have that at a higher rate than other families. Do you have a sense of how frequently they might be moving within like a year or 18 months time?
Not off the top of my head. I will say that we have seen locally, I only have access to like Harris County data, right? But that there are several people there's a significant population of like, once you have an eviction, the likelihood that you'll have another one is increased. And really just because you're forced into even more precarious housing, and the cost to seek housing after an eviction goes up for families because suddenly people want, an extraordinary amount of the rent and security deposit as a form of surety. And so we do find that there's a lot of, I can say anecdotally, that there's a lot of, repeat evictions for families. And, I think actually like having children, of course, again, like just makes you all the more likely to be evicted because your costs are spread throughout so many different necessities, right? Like you have cost of having an appropriately sized home, cost of like providing food for kids, gas to get the kids to school, all these kinds of things.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Zoe. I really appreciate that information. That was great. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Castillo. Thank you, Dr. Castillo, for being with us this morning. And my first question to you is, you oversee the non-academic supports offered by Houston ISD. And from your experience in your role, can you tell us about how these non-academic supports impact families and students, and specifically a student's academic success?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. So in Houston ISD, over the past several years, we have been incorporating best practices that support and address the whole child through different initiatives, right? So one of the initiatives that we have, it's called Wraparound Services, and we have taken this whole child framework to address critical issues like food insecurity, physical needs, social emotional needs, lack of stable housing, violence, incarceration of parents or guardians, and then, legal assistance and any other type of crisis support, as well as additional challenges that can be identified that can have an adverse effect on a student's readiness and ability to learn. We know that there are inherent factors such as, poverty or trauma, and even family engagement when students don't have, active adults that are engaged in their life, that can also add to the challenge that they face with these non-academic supports. And I'm really excited to hear what the other panelists have shared, what Dr. from the medical center share regarding the sleep, because all of those factors we sometimes don't think about on the impact that they can have on a student academic success. And so what we know and what we have seen through research is that when students are burdened or overwhelmed by circumstances, such as not having their basic needs met, or when they're dealing with food insecurity, or when they don't have the right access to mental health or any other type of services, that is really hard to expect for these students to be able to kind of be able to learn, be able to provide the academic expectation or outcome that we are putting just regularly on our students. So it is important to know that in order for our students to be able to succeed, not just on the academic piece, but also to be able to have those non-academic supports we need to have that high quality academic component, but then be able to have the right structure that supports those non-academic needs so that we can maximize the chances and the opportunity for the students to succeed in their academic journey. So we utilize what we call the community in schools model, which is grounded in a couple of pillars that include integrated support, expanding learning opportunities, things like family and community engagement, and also ensuring that we have a collaborative leadership practice, because as we have heard, this is not something that, one silo agency can do by themselves. This truly takes a village, a community effort. So we look at that framework to develop an ecosystem that then can be allow us to have like a tiered approach, and whether we can go and support students through programs that are available throughout the district or their particular school community, or more individualized, targeted, intensive interventions that will require to have those partners or those providers or those resources where we can direct our families when applicable, right? And as part of that academic support, we also have, different areas that support that ecosystem. So I talked about Wraparound, which primarily connects our students or families with a resource, a partner, or a service provider that can meet or address an identified need. But we also have our social, emotional, and counseling teams and other areas that support through interventions and other offerings, so that we could really have that holistic approach on those non-academic services that we provide. And so when we're talking about the impact on academic success, we have to think about school attendance, right? When our students are going through different challenges in their life, the first thing that's going to be noticeable is their attendance. So we focused a lot of attention on making sure that the resources that we are providing are minimizing as much as possible those barriers to attend school, also to ensure that we are building relationship with the students and the family, so the community as a whole can have an intentional engagement with the students. And I love how one of our co-panelists said that we are in this work because we're trying to minimize or remove existing barriers, whether those barriers, have been here for a long time or has just been created. So that is part of the work that we do through the student support services. We try to develop an approach that can provide direct services and resources, preferably in the school community or really close by, because we know that when we identify a need, if we are dealing, especially in under-resourced communities, if we are dealing with a parent that perhaps has, 2 jobs and don't have the time or the means to go from one extent of the city, especially in a place like Houston, that, as many of you know, is such a spread out area, from point A to point B to get the services or the resources they need for their students, then even if the resource exists, right, that family is not leveraging and that student is not benefiting from that particular service or resource. So we really try to, as much as possible, be able to create a system where those resources are available on campus or can be nearby, so that we can ensure that the student is being served in that aspect, and we can minimize, as well as minimizing any transportation and access barrier, but also ensuring that students are not missing class. And so our district has embarked on a new path through a strategic plan that will be guiding us for the next 5 years. And that plan has 6 commitments. And one of those commitments talks about creating equitable opportunities and resources at every school, which will be sort of like the baseline or core experience that we want our students to have. And that includes having these non-academic supports that can serve the well-being and mental health of our students, as well as other needs that have been identified through especially the pandemic. We know that there were a set of very specific needs prior to the pandemic. And then now our communities, and again, especially our underserved and under-resourced communities, have additional challenges that have been identified through that pandemic. So these non-academic supports are more needed than ever.
Thank you, Dr. Castillo. Yeah, and I really appreciate your whole child approach, that it's not just the learning, like we have to have emotionally balanced and healthy students in order to be excellent scholars. So I really appreciate that that point within your 6 for your focuses. Can you talk to me about how other school districts could implement data into resource allocation and better planning? And maybe that goes to the 6 points that you just mentioned. But how can other school districts copy what Houston's doing?
Yes, I mean, I think pretty much every school district, have data points that they can utilize, right? And that can give them some predictors to sort of start determining how they can approach this work. We know that a lot of it may come out of, counseling or your social work, or if they have family engagement, programming. So there are different parts of like a district data ecosystem that districts can leverage to start developing like a robust non-academic framework for their communities. I think in Houston ISD, we have been very fortunate to be able to utilize a platform that we call Purple Sense that is developed and managed by ProUnitas. And in this platform, what we are able to do is to capture the full support process of this non-academic piece. So it's an ecosystem where we have all of our schools, all of our students, and our wraparound, what we call our wraparound specialists. And also we're working on an addition of our counseling, and our social workers are able to identify, they're able to submit a need, they're able to track it, they're able to make notes whether the resource or the service is available, or if something needs to be put on hold because maybe we don't have, the right partner or provider to support the identified need. So that tool or that platform really allow us to make informed decisions, not just in implementing programming, but also on taking action steps of what kind of partnerships we should and can pursue, what kind of needs we have seen it. This has been a tremendous tool, especially during the pandemic, because it allows us to kind of compare and contrast the type of needs we were receiving prior to the pandemic and the ones that we have now. It had allowed us to make informed decisions at the time of contracting direct services that our campuses can benefit from. It has really created like a wealth of data for us. And like I said, I'm sure that a lot of our districts do that. Some districts do surveys. Besides the Purple Sense platform, we also leverage surveying our families on this type of non-academic needs, so that we can then as well utilize that data to make additional kind of like comparisons, to do additional research. We have amazing partners, thankfully, on this work as well. We have the Houston Education Research Consortium, and along with them and ProUnitas, again, the Purple Sense platform that we manage, they were able to assist us analyzing the data that we have, analyzing a survey that we did in 2019 prior to the pandemic, and we're working on an updated version of it now, and develop what we call our needs assessment map. So it's basically a digital tool where you can go into this website, you can see what type of partnerships of services are available on the different schools across the district. You can also see demographic, population and data points for that particular community. And again, that really allows us not only to seek that those next action steps, but also the right type of partnerships. It allows interested agencies and partners to know what communities are having what type of needs, so they can as well partner with us or come to us and be ready to support those needs. And it also allows us to seek funding to meet needs that, again, perhaps before were not identified or were not as high as what we have been seeing it. So really leveraging all the different data points that school district utilize just on the day-to-day basis, and being able to have it in a platform that will allow you to have a more comprehensive look. I think it's what allows you to be able to have that more robust framework around non-academic needs.
Yes, thank you. Well, yeah, that's music to my ears. You're speaking my language when you talk about community partnerships and aggregating this energy and power together. So thank you for that. And so I'm going to invite our attendees to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll address those. And until I see those pop up, since I have the mic, I'm going to keep going. So I have a question for Zoe. As we're talking about community partnerships, and that no one agency can do this alone, right? No, I mean, like, we're obviously a very talented and intelligent panel of ladies, but like, we're not going to be able to solve all of Texas' problem alone. So can you tell me, how can the advocates on this call today, what can they do to support the work that you're doing? Like, what are like 1 or 2 action steps that they could take, or reach out, or something they can do so that we can all work together to move the needle?
I think, understanding like the way we approach this work is really important. And I think I've heard a lot of people on this panel and before talk about like a bottom-up approach. And that's really how we try to approach a lot of our policy creation, is doing policy from below, because there are a million different ways that systems as well-intentioned and well-designed fall short. And so I would say, I'm sure someone working at a food bank or running a Head Start program, sees the gaps in service delivery. And so, as much as wonks can try to design a good program, we also need to know when programs are not working, because there's no way that we're going to design better ones if we don't understand what's wrong. So I think, as difficult as it is to sometimes tap with someone on the shoulder and say, like, actually, like, this diversion attempt is insufficient, or like, you're missing this special population or this group here, that is one of the more useful things as someone in the public sector that we can hear back from people. And then, of course, incorporating and understanding sharing back what you see on your end of things, and how there is potential for a collaboration, because we don't all know how every single other institution functions, is really helpful. But yeah, I would say just ringing the alarm when you see something is actually incredibly helpful. I know some people are loath to do it, but we appreciate it.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer. Thank you, Zoe. I appreciate that. So I have a question for Melanie, because we can have amazing community advocacy and action, but really, to make a system change, we need policy. So if you could wave a public policy magic wand, what would be your one dream instant fix that we could do as Texans to make Texas a safer place for kids to grow up in?
Wow, that's a tough one. I would say really integration of service, and particularly around services that address childhood needs. And so, for a family that's food insecure today, With children, you've got a WIC application, you've got a SNAP application, you've got a Medicaid application, and probably every other application in your son. And that's just, it's unnecessary, right? With as far advanced as we are in technology, the fact that you have to kind of navigate the system to apply for all these benefits, when a lot of this information can be streamlined amongst departments, is really burdensome. And it's oftentimes why we see lapse in benefits or lapse in services. Why a pregnant mom is not applying for WIC until her baby is already born. And at that point, we're now trying to catch up. So really, there's some great states around the country that have done some great work. Ohio comes to mind as integrated benefit programs. And then just if someone chooses not to have that program, let them opt out, right? Instead of having to opt in. If we can do that, I think there would be a wonderful way to be able to also get these departments working together, streamline programs, increase efficiency, and hopefully reduce some of these pitfalls that we're falling into where folks are disproportionately feeling the impact of that.
Yeah, I love that concept of opting out so that the safety net is there, right? Like that's our social contract and commitment to Texas families. And if you don't need it, yeah, I love that. Thank you, Melanie. Okay, I have a question for Dr. Darrough. This is from our chat here, and it says, are there any coalitions related to the policy initiatives that have been mentioned that non-for-profit organizations, policy and advocacy department could be involved in?
So when you speak about coalitions and policies, one thing that is different about my program is it's a federal program. And so we have coalitions and partnerships with several entities. One of the partnerships and coalition is the Harris County Coalition for Early Childhood. That is something that I believe provides a lot of resources. There are a lot of content area experts, and they provide resources regarding children of all ages, community empowerment. There are workshops, and there are parental involvement activities. So that is one of the coalitions that I strongly support.
Good, thank you for that. So I'm actually going to open that question up to the panel. Are there any other coalitions or groups that any of you would like to shine a spotlight on so that people can continue to join in this good work? If not, that's okay. We can always follow up when we.
There are so many. Yeah. I'll send you all a list.
That's all right.
I don't want to leave anyone out, so I'm thinking the same thing. Like there's so many that.
There is. I mean, that's a good problem to have though, right? That there's so many folks on the ground doing this good work. Okay. I have another question in our chat, and this is for Dr. Castillo. You mentioned domestic violence and its impacts on youth. Lisa is saying that Lisa believes this and that it's a child's need to feel safe and be free from fear are two big components related to sleep inequities. Can you maybe reflect on that as far as the school district and what you see from students who might be facing domestic violence and the differential between families, feeling safe and secure versus students who face daily fear?
No, most definitely. And, we know our students nowadays and probably always, right? But it just gets highlighted even more so nowadays with social media and other platforms go through a lot. They go through a lot, especially when they are at home. And sometimes when they are in school and they're acting up, it's not because, the student is a bad individual or because they're just doing it on purpose. We always have to take that time to do that root cause analysis type of like what is triggering this type of behavior. And often when we do find out, about any type of violence that might be going on with them, we do have some protocols that we need to follow to ensure that we're keeping the students safe. But we have also partnered, again, very thankful for our local partners and do a lot of awareness and prevention. I think one of the main, I will say, challenges sometimes that we observe with, especially with our communities of color, is normalizing asking for help. You know, asking for help is not a bad thing. Asking for help doesn't make you a weak individual. Asking for help, you know, doesn't mean that you're lacking something in a bad way. Asking for help means that you need that extra support to push through, to, you know, bring your resiliences into gear. And so I think that is very important that as we go about this work, as you advocate, support, promote, is normalizing that asking for help can happen to any of us in any type of environment. Just because the help that one particular individual is seeking, it's different than the one that I might need, doesn't mean that one is more important than the other, right? So having the ability to truly count with those partners to be able to know what type of support we are ready to offer is going to be key. But I think that as part of this bigger conversation is truly normalizing that asking for help is something that is just normal. It's your everyday. We do it every day in different capacity. So when it comes to services and resources of this type, whether it's for violence or food insecurity, that does not make anyone any less. If anything, I think that, you know, the fact that you are leveraging, you know, a resource that is available and ready to go for you is what's gonna allow you to have some sense of peace and wholeness and be able to continue your journey.
Yes, thank you. It's a courageous step, right? When we remove that stigma, it's actually demonstration of courage. Thank you for that. Well, my friends, this has been an excellent panel. Thank to each and every one of you for the insights and the expertise that you've brought. I very much appreciated our conversation and your time to be with us this morning. So thank you to all. And so we are now going to switch to my colleague, Guadalupe Fernandez, who's going to give us some reflections and comments in Spanish.
Gracias. Sabemos que dormir adecuadamente es esencial para la salud y el desarrollo de los niños. El sueño permite el desarrollo del cerebro y otros desarrollos cognitivos necesarios para que los niños aprendan y retengan información. Varios estudios confirman la asociación entre el sueño inadecuado y el bajo rendimiento escolar. La falta de sueño tiene efectos negativos en el crecimiento físico, el desarrollo muscular, la inmunidad, el metabolismo, lo que pone a los niños con inseguridad del sueño en mayor riesgo de problemas de salud a largo plazo, enfermedades crónicas y obesidad. La falta de sueño en la infancia también está relacionada con una variedad de problemas sociales e emocionales, desde el mal comportamiento en la escuela hasta la regulación del estado de ánimo, la ansiedad y la depresión. Al menos 1 de cada 3 niños en los Estados Unidos no duermen la cantidad de sueño recomendada para su edad y necesidades de desarrollo. Los adolescentes son especialmente privados de sueño, con hasta el 73% no duermen la cantidad recomendada. Hay acciones que los padres pueden tomar para ayudar a sus hijos a dormir lo suficiente, así como establecer un horario regular para dormir, hacer ejercicio, cenar juntos y sanos como familia, asegurar que el ambiente esté fresco para mejor comunidad mientras duermamos y controlar el tiempo que nuestros pequeños usen pantallas y tecnología, y en vez que nos pongamos a leer un libro como familia para que podamos descansar los ojos antes de dormir, o como lo que nos recomendó la doctora Binal, de la importancia de establecer buenas relaciones con nuestros hijos. Desafortunadamente, en varios estudios se estima que hasta el 50% de las familias en los Estados Unidos tienen dificultades para implementar buenas prácticas para dormir adecuadamente. Los reportes nos demuestran que hay muchas familias que no tienen el tiempo ni el dinero o el privilegio de priorizar las buenas prácticas del sueño. Factores como estatus socioeconómico, la raza, el origen étnico, la educación, el tamaño y estructura de la familia aumentan el riesgo de inseguridad en el sueño infantil. Los niños de nivel socioeconómico más bajo tienen más probabilidades de tener inseguridad del sueño y experimentan un sueño menos profundo que perjudica el desarrollo de la memoria y el aprendizaje. Por ejemplo, Es más probable que los padres de bajos ingresos trabajen en varios trabajos, trabajen por turnos, que les agrega dificultad para practicar horarios y rutinas constantes para acostarse, o que los niños tengan que desvelarse para ir a trabajar, para apoyar a sus familias. También sabemos que factores en nuestros vecindarios como la contaminación de la luz y el ruido, el nivel de crimen y la seguridad, y el acceso a espacios verdes o supermercados y otras pólizas se manifiestan en las disparidades del sueño. También se ha descubierto que la inseguridad alimentaria, los problemas de salud mental de los padres o el uso del tiempo de la pantalla son más comunes en los hogares de bajos ingresos y influyen en la cantidad del sueño entre los niños. Entendiendo estas barreras sistemáticas para dormir, Children at Risk estableció un índice de inseguridad del sueño, donde analizamos 12 variables: la inseguridad de alimentos, inestabilidad de vivienda, estatus socioeconómico, ambiente de sueño y factores individuales. Con todo eso, el índice nos ayuda a identificar cuáles niños no pueden dormir bien en nuestra región. En todas las regiones que estudiamos, Children at Risk encontró los vecindarios con mayor riesgo de inseguridad del sueño tienen índices considerables altos de familias de bajos ingresos, familias que utilizan SNAP, o sea, cupones de alimentos, y bajos índices de logros educativos. Los niños hispanos y afroamericanos están desproporcionadamente representados en las comunidades de mayor riesgo de inseguridad del sueño. El condado de Hidalgo, en el Valle, fue la región con mayor inseguridad del sueño para los niños en Texas, seguido por Amarillo y El Paso. Houston, San Antonio y Dallas exhibieron la mayor desigualdad y disparidad del buen dormir. En ciertos vecindarios en estas regiones mostraron un riesgo de inseguridad del sueño mucho mayor que los promedios estatales y regionales. Las 5 regiones de Texas con mayor inseguridad del sueño, según nuestro índice de inseguridad del sueño, son Edinburgh en el Valle, Amarillo, El Paso, San Antonio y Fort Worth. Las 5 regiones de Texas con mayor desigualdad de sueño, según nuestro índice, son Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, Austin y Fort Worth. El buen dormir es una necesidad básica. Al identificar las disparidades en el sueño infantil y apoyar a las comunidades para que aborden estas necesidades, podemos brindarle a los niños el descanso que necesitan para tener éxito, sin importar en dónde viven. Nuestros políticos y oficiales de gobiernos deben darle prioridad a las soluciones que saquen a las familias de la pobreza, reduzcan el hambre infantil y aseguren oportunidades económicas para todos. Es aún más importante darle prioridad a nuestros niños hispanos y afroamericanos y los niños de comunidades inmigrantes que históricamente han enfrentado más barreras para acceder a un sueño adecuado. Todos tenemos que hacer de nuestra parte, no solamente como padres de familias de nuestros hogares, pero también todos tenemos que exigir pólizas para más recursos que apoyen a las familias en nuestras comunidades, así como nuestras escuelas y las organizaciones como los bancos de comida y otros que apoyan a nuestras familias con esas necesidades básicas que todos niños merecen. También tenemos que exigir pólizas que eliminen las barreras para que las familias puedan acceder a esas necesidades básicas. Todos tenemos que exigir que todos nuestros pequeños, sin importar sus estatus socioeconómicos, su raza, su estatus migratorio, tengan la oportunidad de acceder a la buena salud, desarrollo y el éxito para el bien del estado de Texas. Back to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Guadalupe. And for those who don't know, this is, I think, the end of Guadalupe's second week of work at Children at Risk, and we're very happy to welcome her as our director for the Children's Immigration Network. So muchas gracias, Guadalupe. Thank you for including that information for our Spanish-speaking families and advocates. Next, I would like to introduce my fellow El Pasoan and Children at Risk board member, Dan Longoria. He is a Mattress Firm franchisee, and he's going to give us some closing remarks. Dan, we're so happy to have you here today, and I will give the mic over to you.
Thank you for having me. Such great experts and panelists on this call today. I mean, I'm on information overload right now. I'm not sure how I follow that young lady that just spoke. That's like someone winning the Academy Award and you have to speak after someone after. It's like, you know, what do you say? But the passion, I saw someone, you know, talk about her passion, and truly, I think all of us on this panel, everyone involved with children at risk are all passionate about what we're talking about today, sleep inequity. I have to share this because I've had this study, you know, all weekend, and, you know, we were in Oaxaca, and as we talk about these kids, and again, this is Mexico, but I think I know we're talking about Texas, but certainly, you know, sleep inequity is a global issue, and I'll get back to Texas, but these kids working on the streets with their parents, selling, you know, hot dogs, clothes, you know, whatever they had to do to make a living, and, you know, the kids literally falling asleep in the streets or sleeping in cars or, you know, whatever, and that's happening in our communities. I mean, probably not as visible, but it's happening here in the colonias in El Paso. You know, I lived in Houston for some time. I mean, I know it's happening there, San Antonio, everywhere. So, you know, sleep inequity is certainly, you know, global issue. I know children at risk, you know, we're focused on Texas. I'd like to just briefly, I'm going to be brief. I know we have to go. I want to read a little testimonial that I feel encompasses what a child feels like when they truly get the sleep and they don't have to share a couch with 5 other people. Real brief. I recall the day I first received my own bed after years of sleeping in shared beds on couches and on floors. I was middle school age and the oldest of 5 kids. My parents could barely afford food, let alone beds. It wasn't their fault. They were doing the best they could to provide for us. One day, a Good Samaritan gave my parents a big gift, and with that, they were able to fill the cupboards, pay our rent, and take each of us to pick out our own beds from a furniture store. I remember my first night in that bed, feeling so overwhelmed with gratefulness and peace. I slept better than I could ever remember before, and I felt myself gaining more confidence and feeling more hopeful about life going forward. I think this is truly our goal at Children at Risk. If we could solve the problem tomorrow, this is what we'd like every kid going through sleep inequity to feel. So with that, on behalf of Mattress Firm, I want to express our appreciation to Children at Risk for convening this amazing group of experts. At Mattress Firm, we believe all families deserve a safe and comfortable place to rest their head at night. Ultimately, we, the Mattress Firm, we feel Mattress Firm is a foundation for quality rest, but many other factors can also affect how we sleep. The data that was presented today confirms much of what we already suspected. Our children do not have equitable access to sleep. Socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, or the street they live on continue to have the undue influence over the quality of sleep children get. As we learned, adequate sleep is an essential ingredient in children's long-term health and development. A lot of factors go into sleep quality, including factors that might be out of the parents' immediate control, from poverty to hunger or shift work that have barriers to implementing health bedtime practices such as less screen time on their mobile devices is one example. We see kids having more screen time than ever before. My hometown, which I am proud to be a part of, was the 3rd most sleep insecure region in Texas for children. And of course, when I saw that statistic, I thought to myself, how do I jump into action immediately to begin to first understand it better? And then how do I truly speak to the problem and help solve? While ranked 6th in childhood sleep inequity compared to other major Texas regions, inequity with the region was relatively low, with just a 13% differential between high risk and low risk neighborhoods. Many of the sleep insecurity indicators for El Paso were above par with the state average. However, educational attainment, percentage of homeless students, obesity rates, percentage of disabled children, and rate of youth in the workforce were all slightly below state average. Sleep is also very necessary for children to learn and retain information. As the team just presented, studies confirm the association between inadequate sleep and poor performance in school. It also has a negative effect on physical growth, muscle development, anxiety, depression, immunity, and metabolism, putting our children at greater risk for long-term chronic health issues. I want to thank you all for including Mattress Firm in this important conversation. Together with new research on childhood sleep insecurity, we aim to better understand the needs of Texas children and take action to address them now. Back to you, Melissa.
Dan, thank you so much. That testimonial actually choked me up. So I'm going to not cry as I thank you for being here, for everyone for being here today. I think that your remarks really highlight the importance of these partnerships with corporate citizenship and the folks on the ground doing good work. So thank you so much for supporting. You and I have to run to a board meeting, so we need to wrap it up. But thank you for being here, and thank you to Mattress Firm, also to Amazon and AmeriGroup, our sponsors. And so to all of our attendees, thank you for being here. We appreciate your time. We have some contact info. I invite you all to join our Texas Family Leadership Council. We usually party on Thursday mornings and talk about this kind of stuff and how we move the needle for Texas kids. Join us on social media. And on April 7th, you can join us for our next summit. It's 150 miles, health in the borderlands. As an El Pasoan, this is a topic I'm passionate about, making sure that our kids have access to healthcare and have the best chance at a healthy childhood. It's free, just like today was, because of our sponsors. And so please enjoy that event, sign up. And then one final request, we have a QR code here on the screen. We would love your input and your feedback. If you could take that survey. We know Guadalupe got a gold star today with her remarks, but we'd love to hear what you want more of, right? So we can respond to that and give you more summits and topics and information. We would love to be able to do that. So that is a wrap for us today. We hope to see you on April 7th. Thank you to all of our speakers, our panelists. Thank you to our research team. Thank you to our sponsors. And most importantly, thank you to all of our attendees and our advocates. You inspire us every day. Continue to do your good work. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, Dan. Bye.
Bye-bye.